on this computer. There you go. And I will make Mike the host just in case he wants to share his screen with us. Right, over to you, Mike.
Good. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for coming. Let me see if I can just see if I can share screen. So what I thought we'd do is, as it's relevant, I thought we'd do a walking analysis and a running analysis, and see the type of things that we're looking for. If I give you a little bit of an introduction to what we do, we call the Movement and Running School, and we see everybody from 6-year-old dyspraxic kids to 90-year-old hip replacements and everybody in between. So we work with elite athletes, everyday people who move and walk and have injuries, from stroke patients to brain injuries, and a lot of neuro patients. Have been lucky enough to work with a whole range of elite athletes from football, rugby, track and field, Olympians and world champions as well. Now, our methodology has been developed over the last 35 years. We call it movement repatterning, where we change the movement maps in the brain using movement, and we apply it in the same way to rehab as we do to walking re-education, as we do to running and speed for elite athletes. Does that sound okay? Okay, so, right. So I don't know if you can see this. I will, I'm just going to move this out of the way over this side so I can see my screen. And I'm going to, can you see the screen, guys?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So this is actually one of the Great Britain under 23 professional triathletes who I'm seeing this week, and he's allowed me. I'm doing a course this week for a group of physios and some osteopaths, but a whole range of coaches as well. And Cameron is present because he's really interested in the coaching side. So what I'll take you through what we would do when someone comes into the clinic and the center, as we call it. The first thing we do is we look at walking movement. If they run, we look at running movement, and we also do a functional movement analysis where we take them through 10 different exercises, looking at how they bend down, how they turn, how they twist, and how they are on a single leg, because we are gravitational animals. So it's important that we know what's going on when we apply gravity. So Cameron is an elite triathlete. He has a few issues. He had a lot of injuries over the last 2 or 3 years, and we're looking to change his movement patterns to give him more speed and also to make him more efficient as well. So the first thing that we do is we look at stride length. So we measure the stride from the heel of the front foot to the heel of the back foot, and he's wearing black shoes. So you, and that's we can apply angles and distances as well, but we keep it simple to for everyone to understand. And then that's the left side, and then we look at the right side. Okay, and we then measure the two and see, are there any asymmetries? And none of us is really absolutely symmetrical. So in my experience, my 2 clinics, we've seen over 75,000 people over the last 25 years. So we've got a little bit of experience in analyzing and fixing people. So none of us are really very symmetrical. One of the key things is that every single one of us is different. Every single one of us is unique because we've got unique patterns. I get asked the question, why do you look at walking? Well, walking is our primary gait, and particularly after rehab, but also when we're looking at elite athletes, we want to make sure that we can rebuild the kinetic chain. So everything from the right shoulder to the left foot and vice versa, because we are cross-lateral movers. That's the way the brain fires the nervous system. That's the way the nervous system fires the muscles. So we look at the feet, and we're going to look at this from the side, and we're going to look at it from the back as well. And then we look at what else is going on. And we look at the arms. The arms are very important to both walking and running because they give us rhythm, they give us balance, and they give us speed. And if we look at Cameron, and we took a history of Cameron's injuries, and since he was 15, he's 23 now. He has had a whole range of injuries. We look at how the arms are moving, because the arms will tell us if we are symmetrical or not, but also where the movement is coming from. So it's really important that we're using both the anterior chain and the posterior chain, because as humans, our movement and our power comes from the posterior chain. So two things we can see here with Cameron. We can see that his left arm goes behind his hip, but his right arm, we can hardly see it when he's moving it. That's the first thing that we can see. So there is an asymmetry between the left side and the right side. But also we can also see that his movement is coming from his forearm rather than from his shoulder. And that is something that us humans have got 4 pendulums, and but we also got compound pendulums because we bend from the knee and the elbow, and we can get our rhythm from the shoulder, but we can also get our rhythm from just moving the forearm. The problem with just moving the forearm is that then it causes the pelvis and the lower back to be very fixed, and then all the movement is coming from the anterior chain, and we're overusing quads and hip flexors, and particularly in Cameron's case, because he's a triathlete, everything is front loaded. The other thing that we noticed with Cameron when we were analyzing him is that his left forefoot hits the ground a lot quicker than the right one. And that's the reason for that is because all the propulsion is coming from the front. So it's a little bit of a flick, if you like. If I just pause this and we'll look at the back. We'll look at him from the back here. I'll just get this a little bit closer. So when we look at it, look at his movement from the back, we're looking at where the motion is coming from, but we're also looking at the mobility of the body, and particularly with elite athletes, but also in day-to-day individuals. If they've had an accident or they've had an injury, then some of the mobility in the mobile joints is lessened. So Cameron has got a really tight left hip and really tight upper thoracic as well. And in his words, it doesn't move much. If you look at him from the back, you see that the movement's coming from the forearms. And if I just pause that, and we take it frame by frame. So as the left foot is hitting the ground, okay, we can see that he's bringing the right foot over. And then as the right foot hits the ground, we have a little bit of a contralateral hip drop on here. And a lot of his issues are happening on his right side. When he was younger, they were happening on his left side. He did a lot of work on his left side. Now they're happening on his right side. And he's also getting really tight in his hips and his hip flexors. The one thing that is really noticeable is if you look at the apothoracic, is like someone's taken a box of nails and a hammer and just hammered it. There is no movement at all. And that causes him problems when he's swimming as well, particularly on his right side. And you can see with the two dots how when we're loading the single leg, and this also applies to running, but the biomechanics of walking and the biomechanics of running are completely different. One is a mechanical motion and running is an elastic motion. And then from here, this is the first step. The second step is we would look at the running, because running is what he does. And I can show you. Go from the side first of all. Actually, Emily, I have one of Lizzie's videos here when she came down. So if we have time, we'll show some of Lizzie's.
You still haven't sent me my analysis.
Haven't you? Oh, that's naughty. Right. Okay, I'm making a note. I'll send you your analysis. Okay. There was a lot of people on that day. Okay. So when it comes to running, we look at slightly different things. First thing that we look at is how are we landing, okay? And Cameron lands midfoot, so he's landing almost flat on there. If I just highlight that, you can see it that when the whole foot lands, he's landing midfoot. I'll move that out of the way on the left, and then on the right, he's landing first the heel, and then the forefoot comes down as well. Okay. Second thing that we look at is he overstriding, right? So is he landing ahead of his center of gravity? And our center of gravity is from the hip coming downward. So Cameron is landing ahead of his center of gravity, and he is a sprint triathlete. So his running is done with 5K and 10K, and he runs very fast. So his 5K time is just over 12 minutes. So that's in excess of 20 kilometers an hour. Okay, so he's landing ahead of his center of gravity. And why is that a problem? Because what happens is when he lands ahead of his center of gravity, he's braking. So he's causing a braking action. And then when you brake and you spend a long time on the ground, you get a certain amount of stress traveling from the foot, the shin, the knee, the hip, and it finishes about the lower back. So that's the left side, and he's overstriding by about 7 or 8 inches. We then look at his right side. Okay, we see that there's the first point of contact there, and he's overstriding a lot less. Again, he's overstriding a little bit, and it's really difficult to eliminate overstride completely, even with the elite and world elite runners and world record holders as well, particularly on the longer distances. So he's overstriding more on the left than he is on the right, and that fits in with most of his injuries, which were happening on the left, and now he's getting some stress related injuries on the right side as well. Next thing that we look at is what are his arms doing? And the arms are really important to running. So the arms give us balance, rhythm, and speed. So the faster the arms go, the faster the legs go. What we look for in an efficient running style is that the elbow is coming back, bent around 90 degrees or less, depending on the distance, and then it's coming forward, okay, to about shoulder or chin level, depending on the speed. So what we can see here with Cameron is that the elbow's coming back. If we're looking at the left elbow's coming back. Yeah, a little bit greater than 90-degree angle. And then when it comes forward, it's going across the chest, okay? And then he's rotating a little bit. So you can see, we can actually see his right shoulder. And then if we look at his right side, and we'll see this better from the back as well, we can see that it's doing pretty much the same thing, and it's chopping just at the chest level. Now, we mentioned earlier about overstride and what happens when we overstride. So one of the important things with running, particularly elite running, but with all runners, is minimize the amount of time we spend on the ground. Because the longer we spend on the ground, the more stress goes from the foot coming upwards, and the greater likelihood of injury there is. That's the first thing. The second thing is that running is a single leg activity. First, we're on the left leg, then we're on the right leg, and in between, we're in flight mode. The longer we're in flight mode, the faster we are, and the less contact time we have with the ground. So if we just take a look, and I can show you some other examples as well. If we take a look at what happens when Cameron is on his left side, and we load that left leg, we can see that we're dropping a little bit. Okay, so we're dropping about 2 or 3 inches, but we'll get a better vision of this when we look at it from the back. And then we're coming up, so his oscillation is quite high. And then first point of contact with the right leg, and we see that the drop when he's on the right leg is actually bigger than the drop when he's on the left leg. Okay, and that could be, again, we'll see this from the back, could be that he's got bilateral contralateral hip drop, or it could mean that he's dropping more on the right side than the left side. And again, we see this, we analyze it, and then we verify it by carrying out a functional movement analysis, which I'll tell you a little bit about. Okay, so he's not rotating his shoulders as much when he's coming on the right side, but he is a little bit, but on the left side, it's a little bit excessive. When we're talking about elite athletes, every small difference can cause a reduction in the speed, but more importantly, it means he spends longer on the ground, and that can cause more stress and less speed. So if we look at Cameron from the back, and this is where we get a much better picture of what's going on. So I'll just zoom in a little bit. We start the process from looking from toe off. So if we look at toe off from the right side, what should be happening if he is utilizing his posterior chain and his anterior chain, the power with walking and running should be coming from the big muscle groups at the back of the body. So the glutes and the hamstrings will be initiating the propulsion forward in both walking and running. But if we have inefficiencies or activation issues or strength issues, then we find that certain athletes are activating the anterior chain, so the big muscles at the front, particularly the quads and the hip flexors. So if we look at his left side, what should be happening is the foot should be coming in a straight line up. We see that Cameron has an internal rotation of the foot. We're looking at the foot. That means there's a slight external rotation of the shoulder. We'll follow that around and we'll mark where it lands. Just here. And we'll just go back a little bit and go to toe off on the left side. And again, we'll follow the trajectory of the left side from here. And we'll see that, again, we have a slight internal rotation of the foot, which means that he's overusing his anterior chain rather than his posterior chain. And then we'll see that he's landing almost on the same spot, but there is a slight distance. So when we're running, we want to be running across two tracks. So the right foot lands in one track and the left foot lands in another track as well. So what is important is that we're utilizing the big muscle groups, and when we're analyzing, that's what we're trying to see. But if we look at what is going on in movement here, I'll show you. We'll just follow this through and see if he's landing on either side of that line. Okay, and we see that it's actually the left side is crossing over more than the right side, but he's running in a very narrow track. So he's landing on almost on the same track. This is before he gets tired. So we would expect that when he's tired, coming off the bike, the situation will be a little bit worse. Okay. Now, what we were seeing from the side when he was landing on one leg was that the right side was dropping a little bit more than the left side. So as we said earlier, running is a single leg activity. So what happens when we're in stance mode on one leg or the other leg, then it is really important to the stress that loads through the foot upwards. So if we just draw this line on the two dots and then load that left side, we'll see that he's dropping, okay, and that we have contralateral hip drop on the right side. And again, this was verified when we did his functional movement analysis. When he was on the left, he was getting contralateral hip drop, and on the right side,
same.
And the knee was coming into valgus. And then if we look at the right side, okay, it's exactly the same. Okay, so that will alert us to two issues, right? So he trains 25, 30 hours a week. He's got a strength coach by the Great British Team. He's got a swimming coach. He's got a triathlon coach. And he's also does a lot of track work as well. So is it a strength issue? Actually, no, it isn't. We can verify that. So it must be an activation issue or a technique issue, or both. Okay? If we look at what's happening further up the kinetic chain, we can see that the left arm, when we see it from the back, the left arm is coming a little bit at an angle, okay? And then the right arm is doing the same thing. When they're going forward, it's the forearm that's giving us the rhythm rather than the whole arm coming to the shoulder or chin level, which will apply the propulsion forward. When we tested Cameron in the functional movement analysis, what we found that he had a really very, very stiff upper thoracic, he's been finding swimming on his right side quite difficult as well. So No particular injury, just something that happened towards the end of the season. This is their off season, and they're going through a prehab program. I'll just pause it there, and I'll ask for if you have any questions, so we can answer some questions. And then I can, if you're interested, I can go through and explain what we do in the functional movement analysis, which applies to ordinary people as well as elite athletes as well.
Right, so I think the best thing that we can do for questions just now, let me just widen the screen out. If anyone could give me a little wave, if they've got their camera on, or just hi here, drop a note into the chat box if you don't want to have the camera on, and I'll sort of point out who's got questions, and we'll unmute in turn so that it doesn't turn into a squabble. So Hugh, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I've got two questions. So one, do you find, or do you think the treadmill exaggerates that overstriding? That's my first question. And have you noticed generally, if you watch a lot of triathletes, they running, they tend to fix their shoulders. It's just something I've noticed. I don't know if it's because they're quite mobile in the shoulder, they have this sort of habit, but yeah, any comments, thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first question is, does the treadmill exaggerate the overstride, right? Was that the question? Actually, no. Our movement maps, our movement patterns are the same whether we're running on the treadmill or we're running outside, okay? Because they're developed through our training, through our experiences, and through our environment. So they're fixed, if you like. And they change when we have an injury or we're compensating. And all the studies show that unless you're not used to running on a treadmill or walking on a treadmill, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to get used to it, that it's the same whatever surface you're running on, unless it's a bouncy treadmill. This is not a bouncy treadmill. So this treadmill goes at 48 kilometers an hour and 25% elevation, and it's got a really hard surface. Okay. The second question was, do triathletes have a certain pattern? Yes, absolutely they do. So their sport is very anterior dominant sport, right? So cycling, they're down on the handlebars. It's mainly front loaded, so it's quads and hip flexors, which is why they get this anterior pelvic tilt. When it comes to the arms, the only time they're using them is when they're in the pool, and they tend to, because they get really stiff upper thoracic, you tend to see the movement is coming from a wide angle rather than the elbow coming back and to propel the body forward.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
And again,
I'm a little bit skeptical, but I feel the treadmill does alter your pattern of running. I mean, I went to a running assessment for some shoes just out of interest, and my daughter, who's not medical, or she immediately said, "Well, you're not running the same as you'd normally run." So
yeah, that's dependent.
The treadmill's coming towards you, and I feel that is different from having to generate a push. But
yeah, and you know, Hugh, if you stopped running and let the treadmill generate the momentum, you'll fall off the back. Yeah. So the brain won't let you do that. Okay. No. Now, what is critical though, because you do have a point, right? It's critical that you're running at the same speed, okay, that you would be running normally. When you go to get assessed for shoes, they don't look at the whole body. All they're interested in is seeing how your foot lands. Okay, so they're looking at you from the knee downwards. So what we do to we also analyze people outside. But what we do is we run at the speed that they train at or they compete at. Hence why the treadmill can go up to 48 kilometers an hour. No human can do that, but it'll come soon. So, and also it's a stiff surface, so it replicates more of what you would get outside.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Right, do we have anybody else looking for a question to be answered at this point? No waves? No, all good. If anyone's not got their camera on and they want to ask a question, again, just pop it in the chat box. Is that a wave, Sarah? No. No. No, I think, oh, Samantha, are you coming to wave at me or no? Samantha was there when we went down to visit Mike, so I think you probably got all of your questions answered that day, didn't you, Samantha? So I think we're good to maybe talk about the DMS a little bit now, Mike, if you're ready for that.
Yeah, no problem. Let me share and then share it again. So the second part of what we do is what we call a functional movement analysis. I'll just. I won't go through the whole thing in a lot of detail, but the functional movement analysis we use, as Emily referred to, we use something called the dynamic movement skills methodology. We also have a certain number of different mats, which we use for analysis and for rehab. So the methodology is designed to stimulate the nervous system, and particularly the proprioceptive system, to change movement maps, right? So we can analyze someone in less than 15 minutes. In fact, my team does it in under 10 minutes. What we do is we analyze a certain number of different movements, which are functional movements. So the first thing that we look at is there any movement dysfunction? So are they breaking down on the left side or the right side? Has the kinetic chain been interrupted? And do they have muscle activation issues or strength issues or compensatory movement? Particularly after injury, we get a lot of compensation movements. The other important thing is to test the single leg dominance or the single leg imbalances. And by far the most important is to test our proprioceptive system and to see the interaction from the bottom of the feet to the brain and back again. Why is this important? We are, as humans, our body operates like a kinetic chain, right? So any movement that we make from the right shoulder will affect opposite and diagonal. And it's an integration of the joints, the muscles, and importantly, the central nervous system. Particularly when we get injured, it can affect, if we have an ankle injury, for example, and we have a little bit of instability, or we've repeatedly strained the ankle, then we could get chronic ankle instability. And the body is quite an amazing thing. So we have mobile joints and we have primarily stable joints as well. And if we look from the bottom coming upwards, the ankle, the hip, and the thoracic spine give us mobility, whereas the knee and the lumbar spine give us stability. So when something happens, then it affects the whole kinetic chain. And we find quite frequently that people with left ankle injuries will start to rotate their right shoulder to give them the momentum as well. So it's 10 different exercises, some double leg movements and some single leg movements, and also some proprioceptive testing. I'll just take you through some of the movements just so you can see briefly. And the idea is to find out how we're moving right here, right now, not how we move in our dreams. In my dreams, I'm still playing football, but how we're moving now. And also, is the issue biomechanical or is it structural? And what compensations are happening? And when we do the analysis, we're not trying to guess what's going on. We're observing the individual, the client or the patient. We look at how they're moving. And then at the end, we figure out how we're going to change something, if we're going to change something. And then we apply what we call our movement repatterning methodology. I'll go through some of the movements really quickly and give you an opportunity to ask questions. My experience, 99% of the population can't squat. So squatting is an important part of the test. And we look at things like, are the feet rotating outwards? Are there issues with the hip? Are the heels or the toes coming off? Are we compensating with the upper body? And we see a lot of lateral shift, particularly if there's lower back pain. Second movement, test the kinetic chain. We call it a wood chop. And again, we're looking at, is there excessive forward lean? Are we stiff in the upper thoracic? Do we have shoulder compensations? Is there a lack of fluidity? These are really important, whether you're looking at seniors or whether you're looking at elite athletes, is where is the movement coming from? Where's the rotation coming from? So it's a forward, we call it an anterior step and rotate. And it shows us if there's a lack of hip movement, if there's excessive knee bend, and also if when we're moving or bending to pick something up or rotating, if we're locking the knees as well. The same applies for the posterior step and rotate, which simulates stance mode in both walking and in running. And we're looking at, again, where the rotation's coming from. Is the knee coming into valgus or varus? Are there foot compensations? So this is where you can really identify what you saw on the biomechanical analysis, and also what the functional movement analysis shows. And we find that we get more information from the functional movement analysis than we actually do from the video analysis of both the walking and the running. Single leg reach, again, how do we behave on a single leg? Are we bending from the back? Are we bending from the knee? Are we having compensations? Are the calves overworking? And particularly looking at balance. We have an adjusted movement for that when you're working with seniors. You're not going to get everybody to be bending from the hip on a single leg, particularly if they've had hip replacement. Single leg half squat, mini squat. This shows us if there's a lateral pelvic shift, is there a lack of balance, but also does the knee come into valgus or varus, and if there's a hip drop. So we verify basically what we have seen on the video as well. This is, we call this one a dynamic step, which again simulates walking, but we're looking at foot compensations, we're looking at knee valgus, and we're looking at how we behave from the foot upwards when we're on a single leg. And the final test is we're actually testing the proprioceptive system. And this tells us if there's an interruption between the messaging that goes from the feet to the brain and back again. We have a database of over 28,000 people, from youngsters to elite athletes and rehab patients. And we know where the normal foot strikes are for different levels of athletes, but also for individuals who've had injuries. For example, when we're working with neurological or brain injuries, always the movements are really, really slow. And when this is part of the methodology that we also use to work with stroke patients, because what happens with stroke patients is the part of the brain that holds the movement map is actually unable to access the movement map. So what we do is we repattern the movement map from the feet coming upwards. And we've had a lot of success with stroke patients, as well as with brain injuries and neurological issues as well. Whatever we do forwards, we do backwards as well. There's a lot of studies that we've done with the DMS, which we apply to both the rehab, but also the performance, because it increases the firing speed of the motor unit. I'll just come out of there. I'll stop sharing for a little while. Give you guys the opportunity to ask me any other questions if you have them.
So again, let's just go for either hands up or a little message dropping into the chat box if anybody has a particular question. Oh, Hugh again. Here we go.
Sorry. You said something, the 80-20 rule, I noticed.
Yeah.
What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so that's what we try and do is utilize techniques that will improve the movement map of the body quickly. Okay, so we want to give people body control through walking or running, depending on what their primary objective is. So we prioritize biomechanics and re-educating biomechanics to give people control. Okay, so we spend 20% of the time to get 80% of success, if you like, whether that success is walking correctly, getting better balance, getting better mobility, before we then go and spend the rest of the time in looking at the things that will take a lot longer. Okay? Mm-hmm. But our first job is always, if we're looking at patients and working with rehab, is always to inhibit the pain. So it's to reduce the pain. And we do that again through a certain methodology that we use to reverse the way that the brain fires the muscles. And it's all based on movement.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. Yeah. Movement's absolutely key.
Yeah, we agree.
Movement, yep.
So then have we got anybody else with a question just now? Waves or messages? If everyone's all right with it, I would like to go, if that's all right, Mike. It's less of a question, but it's maybe just to share what we've been doing in clinic since we came to see you. So we have a clinic in Sutton Coldfield and one in Lichfield, which I think most of you know me maybe and would know about the clinics. In Sutton, we're lucky enough to have a little bit of space at the back of the clinic that we have as a rehab gym. And we work there with lots of different disciplines. So we have osteopaths, we have sports therapists, and we have a podiatrist. And about 5 of us, I think 3 osteopaths, three of our osteos, one of our sports therapists, and the podiatrist came down to study with Mike. And I've got to say that after having done the weekend course with you, it really has changed the way that we approach running injuries in the clinic. And from my experience so far, having used the analysis tools and the DMS, it's just put such an extra layer on the way that I treat my patients who are runners, and I feel like things are going really well with it. And I'm really, really pleased with how it's going. The only problem that I've got so far is that Lizzie, our sports therapist, is trying to coach me, and I'm just impervious to any advice or cue that she gives me. So although I am trying, I think that I can sometimes get it going on the treadmill when she's watching me and continuously cueing, and then I go out in the park and I kind of muck it all up after a little while. And maybe it is that 80-20 thing. Maybe I'm trying to change too many things all at once. But one of the things that I had struggled with before, and I know that you had noticed when I was running on the treadmill, Mike, you had said to me, "Who told you to run like that?" I was like, no one. I was just doing my best impression of what I thought running was supposed to look like. But I would oftentimes get very numb feet when I was running, and I'd be able to run for about 20 minutes and then I'd just be slapping the floor with 2 numb feet. And I always sort of blamed that on having collapsed arches, and would go to different running shops and get them to film me and buy different trainers and think, oh, you know, it's gonna, maybe I've tied my laces too tight and I can change something else this time and that will be the miracle cure. And I think it literally maybe is the fact that my calves are just contracted the entire time while I'm running on my tiptoes. Which I maintain that is a stylistic choice because I think it looks more elegant. But
important. Yeah.
it's obvious, you know, running to be seen. That is the other thing, is that having done the course now and kind of taken on those analyses tools, that walking in the park is forever ruined for me, because I'm looking at all of the runners who are going past and thinking, oh, you've got too much rotation through those arms, and like your pendulum swinging isn't coming from the right place, or they're really beating the pavement with their feet. I don't really know where I'm going with this, other than to say thank you so much for the knowledge that you imparted to us that weekend, because it has made a very big difference for our patients who are runners. I'm probably alluding to something now that Samantha, who works with me at the clinic in both Sutton Coldfield and Lichfield, will already know about. But I wondered, Samantha, whether you might be able to give us a little bit of an anonymized version of a particular patient who I know that the DMS mat has made a massive difference for. Is an elderly gentleman with cerebral palsy. No, sorry, that's incorrect. Is an elderly gentleman with Down syndrome. And Samantha has been using the DMS mat with this man religiously over the last few months. And I just wondered whether, Samantha, you wanted to share the difference that that's made for your patient.
Yeah, I mean, it's made huge difference. I mean, before we started to use it, so before the course, like support workers were getting involved because he was starting to have some falls and he still wanted to keep his independence. So we were trying to do some balanced stuff. And now we use the DMS mat every week, and he hasn't had any trips, and he's a lot more confident with even just like going on the pavement, and that's
brilliant.
It's just, yeah, it's been really amazing to see his progress.
And it fits in with what we find with Down syndrome, but also Parkinson's and stroke patients. And we do a lot of work with autistic children as well. And it's about giving them control and balance. Okay, and those are the two things that you can do a lot with the dynamic movement skills methodology, because it's looking at improving both the proprioceptive system, but also the nervous system as well. I'm really pleased that you are getting good results. It's the majority of the people who buy the methodology are physio, sports therapists, and osteopaths. I must say less osteopaths than physios and sports therapists, but it's increasing. And they're finding that they're helping their patients immensely with using the methodology. And for me, it's just all pleasure, really, just to hear that. And the other thing you mentioned, Emily, you'll get over the fact that you cannot change the whole world looking at their running, right? Otherwise, you'll get very, very stressed. And I'll plug something here. I've recently written a book which is on Amazon called Who Taught You How to Run? And in the book, I refer to, I was like that, right? And on one occasion, I used to watch this guy every spring and summer go and run the length of the road, which was about a mile. And it was like controlled falling, and the limbs were going all over the place. And I used to say to myself, driving past him at 8:30, 9 o'clock in the evening, I can help that guy. I can really help him get better with his running. And then one day before London 2012, I was working with some elite sprinters, and we had a terrific session, right? And I was on a high. So he was running past, and as I drove past him, I stopped the car, came out, and I took my card out, and I said, "Hi, I'm Mike. I'm a running coach. I can help you." And he goes, "Oh." And he was right, right? Absolutely right. Who am I to tell him how to run and change his running technique, right? And you learn a lesson there that you can't change all the world, and all the world doesn't want to change either. So we can only help those who want to be helped.
This is perhaps the perfect segue then, Mike. So I've just seen in the chat box, Robert has posted a question, and he would like to know, do you have any videos of quote unquote perfect running, or as close to perfect as it can be?
So perfect running technique doesn't exist, Robert, because we're all work in progress. But the perfect technique for the individual does exist. Okay, running, I say that running is simple. It's just not easy, right? It's about, if you've got 4 limbs, then you cycle the legs up behind you to get the propulsion forward, and you move your arms, and then you move forward. But it's stressful. Running is really stressful. I have some, let me see if I can, would it help if I showed you some videos? Let me see if I can get some quickly. So you can see the changes. There's so much stuff on here. Let me just take some of this. The graphics will, can you see that? The graphics will go in a minute, and it'll go into a series of runners. This young lady actually had 3 knee operations, and the doctors told her not to run because she was going to do permanent damage to her knees. It's only because nobody'd shown her how to run, and she was putting a lot of stress on her ankles, her knees, and her hips, and she had permanent lower back pain. But there is a technique for every individual, right? So we can, by tweaking people's technique, and particularly getting the posterior chain to do most of the work, which is how we're designed to be. You can see the difference. You'll see the difference in a side-by-side picture in a minute.
Sorry, Mike,
yeah.
I think you might just have to share the screen, because I think I've just got the participants at the moment.
I'm just talking to myself, am I? Okay, hang on a second. Let me just see. Okay, that's better.
There we go. It's
There we
starting
go.
now.
Okay, let me just forward that a little bit. That better? Can we see that?
Yeah, we can
Yeah.
see now.
Okay, good. So if you look at her movement there, it's a very mechanical movement, very little heel lift. Everything's coming from the front of the body. We're rotating the elbows, the arms across the middle of the body. And then if you look at the re-education, and this took about 6 sessions, between 6 to 8 sessions is what most people improve at. You can see that now she's more elastic. She's spending less time on the ground. And you can see that the heels are coming up a little bit higher. So she's activating the big power muscles to propel her forward. The doctors told her not to run ever. And we changed her technique and agreed that she would run just 5Ks and 10Ks. And I think this is the 6th or 7th year that she's been running pain-free. She gets a lot of pleasure out of running, and she's able to do it 4 or 5 times a week. This is an elite triathlete. Jen used to run like a chicken, if you see the one on the left side, and really hammering the ground. The fitter someone is, the quicker you can make the changes. And this was Jen after 3 sessions, actually. So you can see now the difference in the propulsion, but also she's spending less time on the ground. So none of these are perfect technique because it doesn't exist, but it's perfect for the individual. This is a masters runner who kept on getting loads of injuries, and he kept on tripping up, whether he was running on the track or he was running on the trail. Yeah. And you see the arms, there was lack of use of the arms, and they were coming right behind his body, which was a compensation to balance because he was losing his balance and falling down. And you can see the difference on the other side. This lady started running to de-stress, and she started getting a lot of pain in her hips and the back. And you can see that the blue t-shirt video, she's running along a lot differently. That was 2 years ago. She's now running ultras. So she goes for regular 50 to 60 kilometer runs at the weekend. These are all recreational runners who wanted to improve their running, either because they didn't like running or because it was painful to run. Again, you can see the 2 key characteristics. It's what the legs are doing in terms of cycling behind us to propel us forward, but also what the arms are doing and how much more upright we get from that as well. Let me I'll just pause it there for a second, and what I'll do, let me just forward it. And I'll show you some kids, because we love working with kids. These are some of the things I was telling you about. This is one of our stroke patients, but kids' nervous system is very plastic, and so they change very, very quickly. They're also cheeky. And they get body control really, really quickly. And we see a variety of children from kids who've been diagnosed with dyspraxia or who are on the autism spectrum and various other dysfunctions, to young athletes, footballers, rugby players, runners. So this young girl was diagnosed with dyspraxia. She didn't have dyspraxia. She was just a slow developer, and she couldn't run. So when you teach them how to run, it's amazing the confidence that they get, but also the body control. What we find from what parents feed back to us is that the confidence they get from their body then starts to show in class, starts to show with their friends, and they try different sports as well. This young man is now with an academy. When he came to us, you can see it was almost a controlled fall, or controlled how not to fall. But just pause it there because I can show you those all night. Done. There's loads on our Instagram and our website. I think Francesco wants to ask a question. You want to unmute yourself? Hi.
Yeah, hello. Hi. Sorry, I just wanted to know if you have realized any differences between long distance runners and shorter distance runners in the anterior pelvic tilt.
In what way, Francesco?
Like if in shorter distance runners, individuals usually have a more anterior pelvic tilt rather than longer distance runners.
Particularly sprinters, footballers, rugby players, the short, sharp movements. Yeah, because they're utilizing the quads and the hip flexors, they get an anterior tilt. But we also have ultra runners who have that as well. And the difference between ultra runners and half marathon or marathon is that there is a specific running technique for ultra runners depending on what they're doing, right? So whether they're going up and down trails or whether they're going long distances or whether they're walk running as well. So you're tweaking the technique to make it appropriate for the distance and the event that they're running at.
Okay, and so is there a relationship between the anterior or posterior pelvic tilt and the more time spent on the ground?
Yes.
Did you say?
Absolutely, yeah, there is. So what happens is people with an anterior tilt, what happens is they're unable to activate the glutes and the hamstrings in the right firing sequence, right? So what happens is as the leg comes back, it actually comes down really quickly and they hit the ground a lot harder. Not everybody, you can see a lot of elite footballers who've got an anterior tilt who can run at 30, 32 kilometers an hour for short bursts, right? The problem is what damage is being done when the hamstring is, instead of doing a power job, is doing a braking job.
Okay. Yeah. So probably like shorter distance runners would spend more time on the ground than longer distance runners?
No, not necessarily, because it depends on the speed that you're going at, right?
Well, it's going to depend on the runner.
It depends on the speed that you're running at and also how high the heel comes up behind you, right? To propel you forward. Yeah. So cadence is important, speed is important. Actually, cadence is a byproduct of speed, but also your interaction with the ground.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So very quickly, Robert has just popped one last question into the chat box. And I think I know what the answer to this one's going to be, Mike, but what do you think of barefoot running shoes quickly?
Okay. So two things. It's not the shoes that make the runner. Okay. It's the runner who makes the shoes. Now, it's a preference, right? There's been a lot of changes, particularly over the years with the promotion of minimalist running, because it's not barefoot, because that's an oxymoron, right? Because if they're shoes, then we're not barefoot. But barefoot running promotes landing on the forefoot and there's two things here. One is having room for your feet, your toes to expand, but also landing on forefoot. Landing on forefoot is not running technique on its own, okay? So there's three ways to land: heel, toe, midfoot, or forefoot. What people need to understand is that it takes anything up to 10 to 12 months to transition from heel, toe to forefoot. And forefoot running is mostly for shorter distances or fast distances. 90% of the world's elite long distance runners, half marathon, marathon, run heel toe, and they're still running at 21, 22 kilometers an hour. So for me, it's a preference. If you want to run with minimalist shoes, or not.
Thank you so much, Mike. I am aware we've gone about 10 minutes over, so thanks for everyone for sticking around this evening. We'll try not to take up too much of your evening, Mike. But what I would like to say just before we all clear off for the evening is that if you would like to find out more about Mike and his method and maybe do some really fantastic CPD with him down in Acton, you can find him at runningschool.com. That is where we booked our CPD, and Mike has got some really fantastic courses, and I'm sure he would be very excited to welcome some more osteopaths into the running school fold. You can find Mike's book, Who Taught You How to Run, on Amazon. Like he said, we bought a copy for our clinic, and people have been reading that. It's out in the staff room. It's been welcomed through. If you can't tell already, I am a massive advocate for what Mike taught us, and you might meet me down on some of his CPD talks in Acton again. I would highly recommend going. I think what Mike's shared with us this evening is a mere snapshot in his knowledge that he has to share with clinicians and the difference that he can make to the way that you practice. Thank you so much for spending an hour of your evening with us, Mike. I know how busy you are, so we really do appreciate it. Our next talk is with my esteemed and very much missed colleague Hans Sturm, who will be joining us from Switzerland, his new home, talking about insulin resistance, and that is on the next first Thursday of the month. I do believe I haven't got the website up now. It's the first Thursday of December. I think it might be the second. So if you can join us then, that would be grand. And the recording of tonight's talk will be going up on the website, and hopefully Joe will be emailing you all with instructions of how to get into that password protected area, hopefully next week sometime. But thank you so much once more, Mike.
Thank you very much.
A round of applause. Thanks for joining us, and thank you everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Yeah, bye.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you.